All right, y'all, got some breaking news. I'm sure you've heard by now, but Donald Trump has been officially indicted for basically trying to stop the approval of the election. I was going to say over January 6th, but it's not. It's kind of about January 6th, but almost more about the fake electors thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, let me walk you guys through this here. So here are the things he's being indicted for. Number 1, conspiracy to defraud the United States. Number 2, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. Number 3, obstruction of official proceeding. And number 4, conspiracy against rights. So there's also 6 co-conspirators, unindicted co-conspirators. And my understanding is that it could be like Sidney Powell, Eastman, who was another attorney who was like, feeding his delusions. Also Rudy Giuliani, who played a key part in a lot of this stuff.
Rudy is 100% one of the is unindicted co-conspirator number 1 because they have some quotes that I happen to know came directly from him. So yes, Rudy is in there.
Now, the reason why they're unindicted at this point in time is likely because Jack Smith and the Justice Department are trying to get them to flip on Trump. And this is a way of being like, hey, just so you know, like, your ass is next if you don't get in line. So is that a fair reading of it, you
likely.
think?
Very likely. And he did make a point. Jack Smith gave a press conference. It was very short, just announcing the charges, talking a little bit about January 6th and how, this fraud on the American people is what led up to the events of January 6th. But he made sure to note that their investigation continues. So the fact that these people are currently unindicted does not mean that they are likely to stay unindicted if they don't cooperate and strike some kind of deal.
Yes. So I want to read the introduction for you guys so you see exactly what Jack Smith is doing here. He says, the defendant, Donald J. Trump, was the 45th president of the United States and a candidate for re-election in 2020. The defendant lost the 2020 presidential election. Despite having lost, the defendant was determined to remain in power. So for more than 2 months following Election Day on November 3rd, 2020, the defendant spread lies that there had been outcome determinative fraud in the election and that he had actually won. These claims were false, and the defendant knew that they were false, but the defendant repeated and widely disseminated them anyway to make his knowingly false claims appear legitimate, create an intense national atmosphere of mistrust and anger, and erode public faith in the administration of the election. Now, this next part I actually found really interesting. He said the defendant had a right, like every American, to speak publicly about the election and even to claim, falsely, that there had been outcome determinative fraud during the election and that he had won. He was also entitled to formally challenge the results of the election through lawful and appropriate means, such as by seeking recounts or audits of the popular vote in states or filing lawsuits challenging ballots and procedures. Indeed, in many cases, the defendant did pursue these methods of contesting the election results. His efforts to change the outcome in any state through recounts, audits, or legal challenges were uniformly unsuccessful. Shortly after Election Day, the defendant also pursued unlawful means of discounting legitimate votes and subverting the election. In doing so, the defendant perpetrated three criminal conspiracies, and then they go through the things that I already told you guys about. But I found that interesting because he's like, look, you have a right to say, I think this election is bullshit. I think I won. I'm questioning the election. I'm going to use like these legal avenues to try to push back. He's saying that's all a totally fair game.
Yeah.
But in this instance, that is not what happened. He went above and beyond that to the point where he did things that were illegal. And he also, he claims knowingly said things that weren't true on purpose for the sole reason of trying to stay in office.
Yeah. Let me just,
Go ahead.
One thing that is significant about that is he's anticipating one of the defenses that you already hear coming from Jonathan Turley, another sort of like conservative or Trump sympathetic type legal analyst, which is most of this is protected First Amendment free speech.
Yeah, that is not true. I'll give the specifics in a second. Go
ahead. And so Jack Smith is going to great lengths here to say, listen, I got no problem with him saying it. I mean, I like it, but it's not illegal. Where I have a problem is when you put together fake slates of electors, pressure a bunch of public officials, pressure Mike Pence to try to subvert the will of the people, and go to all these extraordinary lengths in 7 different states that they go through methodically and document exactly the efforts that were undertaken in each of those states. That's where I end up having a problem.
Yeah, I was looking for, let me see if I can find it quickly by doing this. No, it doesn't allow you to like go into the document, but I was going to read the different states where they did the fake electors thing.
I actually have it listed down here.
Okay.
I think, at least in part. I know they've got Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin were the 5 that I saw, but I think there may have been 7 states that are listed here. But They go into depth in each one. He clearly goes to great lengths to attempt to prove that not only did Trump make false claims, but he knew that they were false, that he engaged in these schemes and this fraud, this fraud, knowing that these lies were false. And I'll give you one example of some of the proof that they marshal, to try to make that case, that any reasonable person, having faced this person and that person, and this elected official and that elected official telling you there's nothing to this, would have given it up. But of course, Trump never gives anything up. But they have this one piece here in Georgia where they say on November 25th, co-conspirator 3 filed a lawsuit against the governor of Georgia, falsely alleging massive election fraud accomplished through the voting machine company's election software and hardware. This is probably Dominion voting stuff, right? Before the lawsuit was even filed, the defendant, that's Trump, retweeted a post promoting it. The defendant did this despite the fact that when he had discussed co-conspirator 3's far-fetched public claims regarding the voting machine company in private with advisors, the defendant had conceded they were unsupported and that co-conspirator 3 sounded crazy. That Georgia lawsuit was then dismissed on December 7th. Co-conspirator 3 very likely to be Sidney Powell based on what we know about these events. But why that's significant is in most of these instances, they just have like, oh, Bill Barr or whoever told Trump there's no there there. They don't have Trump acknowledging that you're right, there's no there there. In this instance, they have him saying, yes, she sounds crazy, and yes, these claims are unsupported.
So I got another one for you in that same vein. Trump said to Vice President Pence that he was being, quote, too honest when he said he had no authority to reject electoral votes. So that's him being like,
being too honest.
So he's like, I know this isn't really allowed. I know I'm wrong, but I want you to do this anyway. So he's really kind of hanging himself here. Now, so it looks like he knew it was BS all along, but even if you say, you know what, maybe he sincerely believes it or he convinced himself of it or whatever, then the second question becomes, but would any reasonable person, given what was presented to him, is it okay for any reasonable person to sort of disagree?
Right.
And on that, I mean, they go into painstaking detail in this indictment where they list all the people. Here's who told Trump, this is bogus, this is not true, we can't do this, etc. You have Mike Pence himself, and Mike Pence was also relying on legal experts from the Reagan era because Pence had reached out to these people when Trump tried to put this on him, and he was like, if they say I can do it legally, then maybe I'll do it. But the guys were like, of course you can't do this. You're in a ceremonial role. You can't just like reject the election. Senior leaders at the Justice Department as well told Trump, this is crazy and you're wrong and there isn't widespread election fraud. You didn't win. The Director of National Intelligence, same thing. The Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, they told him the same thing. Senior White House attorneys told him the same thing. Senior staffers on the defendant's 2020 re-election campaign told him the same thing. State legislators and officials told him the same thing. So he would call, in many instances, people who were responsible for carrying out the election in various states, and they'd be like, no, you can't do this.
Right.
And then they would just go forward. And like, look, I think, honestly, the thing that sticks out to me is, the thing that I think is really going to screw him is the fake electors slates. Because that's like, it's very actionable. There's a process for the election and they were going through it vis-a-vis Biden because he actually won. And they did this parallel election infrastructure where they even lied to the people who did it. And they were like, this is only going to kick in, if it's actually overturned. So they lied to these people. They set up, they like made them go through this whole process. Crystal, they have a paper trail of it.
Right.
Like, how stupid are you to make a paper trail of your own crimes?
Right.
And then you have state legislators and officials told them the same thing. State and federal courts repeatedly told them the same thing. I want to give you guys some more quotes here. This is a senior Trump advisor in a 2020 email. Quote, it's tough to own any of this when it's all just conspiracy shit beamed down from the mothership. So this person was venting. He's like, we're 0-32 in these cases trying to overturn the election. And the reason why we're 0-32 is because it's, quote, conspiracy shit beamed down from the mothership.
The mothership being Trump, I guess. And the Trump White House.
Yes, exactly. And so this was another part as well that I thought was very interesting. There was very we actually were super duper close to just like an all-out coup. Like there was talks behind the scenes of like just invoking the Insurrection Act to stay in office. And so this is one of the parts that's cited in here. On the afternoon of January 3rd, co-conspirator 4 spoke with a deputy White House counsel. The previous month, the Deputy White House counsel informed the defendant that, quote, there is no world, there is no option in which you do not leave the White House on January 20th. Now, the same Deputy White House counsel tried to dissuade co-conspirator 4 from assuming the role of acting Attorney General. The Deputy White House counsel reiterated to co-conspirator 4 that there had not been outcome determinative fraud in the election, and that if the defendant remained in office nonetheless, there would be, quote, riots in every major city in the United States. Co-conspirator 4 responded, so as one of the Trump's partners in crime, quote, well, that's why there's an Insurrection Act.
Wow. That's chilling.
Yeah, so in other words, I don't care. We're going to stay in here come hell or high water, and if need be, we'll just send the troops into the streets.
The level of mayhem that they are totally comfortable with is truly shocking.
I know.
Truly shocking. So,
from my perspective, I'm curious what you think about this.
Yeah.
I think the thing that really is going to stick, because again, just to reiterate what the crimes are here, conspiracy, oh, I should bring this up. So conspiracy to defraud the United States, it's interesting that that's what he goes with. Also, the whole like conspiracy against rights things, I think that's really clever and it actually makes perfect sense. The idea is like, you are trying to disenfranchise all of these voters and take away their right to vote by simply overturning the election because you want to.
Yeah.
And I think that's fair. I think that's because I hear some people saying like, oh, you're using like whatever, some 1877 act to do this, or using some Civil Rights Act provision to do this. And it's like, yeah, that sounds perfectly reasonable if you are trying to effectively throw out the votes of all these people who voted in the other direction.
Yeah, I mean, it makes logical sense to me. I think it's also worth keeping in mind that, number one, some of these charges have already been effectively prosecuted against lower level, like just rank and file January 6th rioters. And so I've always thought it was incredibly unjust, this idea that, yeah, they should be held accountable for their crimes, storming the Capitol, whatever they did that day, attempting to obstruct an official proceeding. Some of them have been charged and found guilty of. But it was incredibly unjust that the guy who's the ringleader of it all had not faced any charges whatsoever. You know, this DC court is where a number of January 6th rioters have already been tried. Trump will be tried, we expect. In DC, it is worth noting, this is the most democratic voting jurisdiction in the entire country.
An Obama-appointed judge, too.
And it's an Obama-appointed judge.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's not a great hand in terms of Trump trying to win at trial with this particular judge and this particular jury. I do think there's a chance, though, that it goes up to the Supreme Court. And, you know, what happens there, I have no idea.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, look, in a weird way, they're not as conservative when it comes to process stuff like that.
I mean, there's a chance that they want to be rid of Trump as well.
I think it's actually very likely that they want to be rid of.
That they want to be rid of Trump as
they're
well.
like Mitt Romney conservatives. They're not like Trump chaos type conservatives. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Mostly, yeah.
So anyway, look, I think conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of official proceeding, conspiracy against rights. Again, the thing that sticks out to me that's like most clearly illegal, I think the classified document stuff is actually a slam dunk case.
I do too.
Right, but
yeah.
it's a process crime, so people don't look at it as like, that as important.
Yeah, it's not the core of what people hate.
Right, yeah.
About Donald. It's like a friend, like, yeah, he's reckless and he just does whatever the hell he wants. Like, people do hate that about him, but January 6th was a searing event. Like, but this gets to the core of what people are really upset with this man
I think
about.
Jack Smith is smart, though, to make it more about the fake electors. Because that's so provable. And what they're saying is, this is totally fraudulent, and you knew it was fraudulent.
Right.
And even if you didn't know it was fraudulent, which honestly I think is debatable because he might believe his own BS, the fact of the matter is, any reasonable person, given the information that he was presented with, would have had to back down from what they were doing.
Yes.
They would have had to do it.
Yes.
So in a weird way, I think intent matters, but not maybe as much as people might think intent is everything in this. Like, does he really believe it? Because if he really believes it, then maybe it's legitimate. But I honestly don't even think... he might actually really believe it. He might not. But the fact of the matter is, all of the stuff that's laid out in this indictment, it was like any reasonable person would say, I might feel this way, but I can't continue going down this path. Because this is definitely a fraudulent act. Now, I want to give you the statement from the Trump campaign, and then we can wrap up on this, Crystal.
Yeah.
But he released the following. This is nothing more than the latest corrupt chapter in the continued pathetic attempt by the Biden crime family and their weaponized Department of Justice to interfere with the 2024 presidential election, in which President Trump is the undisputed frontrunner and leading by substantial margins. But why did they wait? I can't do this the whole time. But why did they wait 2.5 years to bring these fake charges right in the middle of President Trump's winning campaign for 2024? Why was it announced the day after the big crooked Joe Biden scandal broke out from from the halls of Congress? That stuff is peanuts compared to this. I know. The answer is election interference. The lawlessness of the... It's so ironic because, like, what he did was election interference. You were trying to overthrow an election. It's so frustrating. The lawlessness of these persecutions of President Trump and his supporters is reminiscent of Nazi Germany in the 1930s, the former Soviet Union, and other authoritarian, dictatorial regimes. President Trump has always followed the law and the Constitution with advice from many highly accomplished attorneys.
Like Rudy Giuliani and
Oh
Sidney
my
Powell.
God, man. My God. To compare this stuff to Nazi Germany, and again, for him to invoke, authoritarianism and dictatorship, like, for the love of God, man, you signed a pro-torture executive order. You tried to coup Venezuela. You wanted to invoke the Insurrection Act. We're really talking about other people being dictatorial?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, it's typical Trumpian from there, witch hunts, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
but
borders, energy independence. Okay.
I mean,
I don't need to read the rest
I
of
think
it.
it's a good pivot to talk a little bit about the politics of how this all plays out. Republican primary, friggin' 70% of them think the election was stolen. They believe Trump's claims. They think they agree with every word probably of this statement.
Facts.
It only probably helps him if it moves the needle at all. Ron DeSantis, I'm sorry, man, it's not happening. General election is obviously a completely different ballgame. I mean, we already know from 2022 that Stop the Steal was a real problem for American
Can I
voters.
bolster your point real quick?
Yeah.
Those who think X is a serious crime, conspiring to overturn the results of a presidential election, 70%.
Wow.
Aiding and indicting an insurrection against federal government, 70%. Attempting to obstruct the certification of a presidential election, 67%. This will not fly in Normieville. You go up in the Republican primary, you go down in the general, as has been his trend with all these indictments and basically being an obvious criminal.
Yeah, it just puts at the center of 2024 the part of Trump that people hate the most.
Right.
And also reminds, I mean, this was a horribly stressful, fraught period of American life. And it's like, you really want to go back there? You really want to get this guy back in the White House so he can do this kind of bullshit all over again? So, politically, I think it is devastating for him. I do think that Republicans will be very swayed by the point of, like, why did you wait so long, and this is just political, and you're trying
gather
to
all the
Trump down,
evidence,
et cetera,
man.
et
Like,
cetera.
this was very detailed.
I mean, I
you
do
really
wish-
needed to dive deep into this.
I understand that. I do wish they brought the charges sooner, though, because
I hear you,
if
but
the
it takes
Senate
work.
could
This
get
takes
their-
work.
If the Senate could get their shit together to do their whole January 6th presentation,
But that was a
like,
dog and
why
pony
did it
show.
take? Why did it take so
'Cause-
long? Because now.
He needs real evidence, though. The January 6th committee, you could say whatever you want. It's a congressional proceeding. Like, they
Yeah.
could cite some article from some far-left blog, and it's fine. You can't, when you're dealing with actual legal case, you got to dot your I's and cross your T's.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this probably could have been done in a more expeditious manner that would have been better for the country as someone who wants to see this guy go down and never be anywhere near the White House whatsoever.
Because to your
ever again.
point, he can win the primary now, and then we'll get the answer before the general, but he will have already won the primary.
Yeah, and once
Yeah.
you win the primary, like, God knows anything can freaking happen.
I know, it's
like,
terrifying,
even with
yeah.
this set of, state of affairs, Joe Biden is an old man. Like, God only knows what could happen between now and November in 2024. If you are the nominee for one of the two major parties, there is a chance that
Yeah,
you will
that's
end
right.
up in the White House.
That's right.
So, that's my thing about the timing, is I do wish it was earlier because I'm very nervous about that outcome.
Yeah, I hear you. So we'll end with this. Trump could face a maximum of 55 years in prison if convicted on all the charges in the January 6th case.
Wow.
And that's to say nothing about all the classified document stuff.
And
Whatever's coming in Georgia, which
Georgia's
might
still
be,
hanging
again,
out there.
that's over the fake electors. So that's a real case.
Yes.
So they say conspiracy to defraud the U.S., 5 years, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, 20 years, obstruction of an official proceeding, 20 years, conspiracy against rights, 10 years. So big stuff, that's for sure.